We're talking to Hector Penalosa from the Zeros and other bands, a lot of other bands.
Oh man, I've had a lot.
Well, we'll hopefully get into as much as we can.
Okay.
So, why don't you tell me how and when did you first get into music?
When I was probably around 7. My dad was a musician. He was a pianist, and he had an incredible record collection. Anything from classical to jazz and everything in between. And when I discovered his records, he didn't want me to put them on the turntable because he thought I wouldn't be able to be careful with them.
Mm.
So when he would go to work, I would put them on the turntable, and my mom would be really nice about that and just make sure they're okay, and she wouldn't tell my dad that I would do this. And I was exploring vinyl, and one record that really caught my ear was Cy Coleman's The Ages of Rock. And it's basically classical pieces performed with electric instruments and drums, along with the piano, or the harpsichord. And it really caught my ear. I thought it was really interesting, Mozart pieces and what have you. And the other one was the Supreme's Greatest Hits. That was really something because the songwriter was incredible. Oscar Holland, I Hear a Symphony was my favorite cut on that.
Huh?
It was a double LP, but that song, for whatever reason, I had to keep playing it over and over and over. And Run, Run, Run's a really great song on that record. So that was sort of my introduction to records and music. And then we're talking mid-1960s, 67, and I did catch a couple of Beatle cartoons on Saturday mornings, but I was watching the cartoons more as a kid watching cartoons than say being interested on what they were playing or singing about, and that Beatles did influence me, but not till 1971.
Yeah, I was going to say, how and when did you get into the Beatles? How did you?
You gotta, if you recall, I think it might be a little younger, but when the Beatles broke up in 1970, the whole world was basically mourning that breakup, right? They're like, oh no, the Beatles broke up. So no matter.
I was only 3.
Okay, yeah,
so yeah,
you won't remember. But it was no matter what radio station you were listening to, they were playing the Beatles. Or if you got onto TV, the news report was the Beatles were breaking up, And and another thing I remember when I was 5 or around 6 or 7 was I went to the movies. We saw Help. My babysitter took me to see Help.
Oh, wow.
In San Pedro, and I didn't really want to go, but she bribed me. She bought me a toy at Thrifty's across the street from the movie theater. And I remember sitting in the movie theater, and with all these kids, and the movie starts, and everybody just went bananas. They're screaming, and it was Help and Born Free, the second movie, and then we sat through Born Free so we could watch Help again.
Oh wow! So you liked it?
I was a little kid. I mean, I was watching it, but it didn't really click anything in me. But I definitely caught the excitement of all the kids in the movie theater. I thought, man, they're really going crazy on this thing. I mean, I was too young to appreciate the Beatles for who they were, until later when they broke up. And I remember when I heard a song on the radio during that year where they broke up, I've heard those voices before. That's the first thing that I remember saying. I recognize those voices, and then I hear more, and then it started really grabbing my attention the more I heard those songs on the radio, that I finally made the connection. Oh, that's that movie I saw. That's the cartoon I used to watch. And it all just sort of went whack, and I was like, okay, I get it. And around 70, 71, my dad and my mom had broken up, and so it was a very dysfunctional marriage, and I didn't want to get too caught up in the bummer part of that and end up being depressed because I don't have parents that can get along. And music became my escape, actually. And it was really the Beatles music that, it was my happy place to go to, you know. And then I was like, oh, I want to play these songs. I want to learn how to play a guitar. And that's how I started getting into being a musician. And I became obsessed with it. I was like, I guess at that time I never realized it was a therapy of sorts for me to be in a positive spot as opposed to be all like, oh, my parents suck. Well, you know, I was like more like, yeah, okay, I'm going to do this and I don't have to think about that, you know, kind of thing. I mean, I didn't think of it back then, but I realized that it was like that was my escape, you know, from that. And
so the Beatles inspired you to
be a musician.
Take up music.
Oh yeah, totally. You know, and I just went at it for like 2 or 3 years. I didn't have proper schooling for guitar. My aunt had lent me this $20 guitar that you could buy at the Tijuana border when you crossed into the U.S. and it was you know, it was a rough start, but I got through the learning curve to the point where I had a little book that had guitar chords on it, and it showed you how to play these Beatles songs and stuff. So I finally put it one together and said, oh, that's how you make a guitar chord. And I strummed it, and it was the A chord. I'll remember that always. And it was like, ching, like a choir angel, super clean and crisp and very distinct. And I went, oh, my God, I made it. I broke through the wall. And I just even got more crazy on it. I was like, I got to play more, you know, and got to play more.
Wow.
So that's how, and then I just kept at it. I would, you know, we didn't have YouTube. We didn't have tape recorders that you could just sort of play on. So I would slap the record on my little portable record player and try to play along.
So you started with actual guitar, not bass.
Yeah, no, I started with guitar, and I was playing that guitar, I think, let me think. Yeah, for about 3 to 4 years, I was just strumming and trying to pick out those George Harrison little on one string, you know. Trying to play
did you ever have lessons or anything?
You know, when I had already invested almost like three years or around there, I found out there was a free guitar lesson class at a Cholusa Community Center in Hilltop area up there, and so I took the bus out there one day and I took my guitar and I was playing left-handed upside down, and I never changed the strings.
That's why I wanted to ask you about that. So that's how you learned.
Yeah, that's how I learned.
Left-handed upside down.
Yeah. And so I knew that after having read these music books and stuff that, you know, the string should have been turned around.
Why didn't you do that? Or you just didn't know?
I didn't know.
Huh?
I didn't know any better. You know, they say the bumblebees don't realize they're too heavy to fly, but they still go out and fly, right?
Okay.
You know, so okay, that makes sense, I guess. So there was and the teacher, he was this young sort of hippie guy, kid, you know. And I said, hey, you know, I know that I'm supposed to switch the strings around because it is how I learned how to play upside down. And I mean, should I do that, you know, for the class? He goes, no, you're just going to get more confused. He said,
really?
Unless you're going to be a jazz guitarist, I could see you having to do that. But if you're just going to play basic chords and that kind of stuff, just leave it alone. And I took his advice.
Huh.
Isn't that crazy?
I think it's totally insane that you play left-handed. Well, the left-handed is fine, but upside down too. So you can't do Ramon songs with the downstroke. Do you have to do the upstroke every time, or do you just strum?
I just strum. And you know, it's interesting because once you mix in the drums and the other guitar or the other bass and the singing, you can't really even tell that it's going the wrong strum direction.
Okay.
It just sort of blends in, you know. It's kind of weird, you know.
So now I always told you that, wow, I think this is blows my mind. But you said it's not that unusual. Jimi Hendrix, did you say?
Albert King is definitely one that plays it upside down. Jimi Hendrix did switch the strings around. I know that McCartney can play both ways. I've seen him in photos where he would pick up like John Lennon's guitar, you know,
really?
And he's strumming it, and you're really going, oh, he's just making an E chord right there, like,
oh, wow.
You know, upside down.
Huh.
But when he plays his own guitars, they're strung for lefty, you know, because he the same thing. He probably learned on the right-handed guitar for a little bit, you know, to the point where finally realized, oh, maybe I should switch them around. Because that was the other thing. One of the reasons was that when I did want an electric guitar, left-handed instruments were considered a custom job, and they were very expensive. So if you didn't have that kind of money,
you didn't have a choice.
Just go get a righty and flip it around, and maybe if you want to switch the strings around, you switch the strings around. But in my case, I would just learn just by flipping it over.
Now, you also told me before that you learned how to play to the New York Dolls album.
Oh yeah, that was at right around the time that I met the Zeros. You know, before they were the Zeros. I mean Baba, and I met Baba Chanel, the drummer. That was 1975, and we met in Chula Vista Junior High. And I had been playing guitar up to that point, and Bob and I became friends, and he would play his drums. He had them in his parents' house in the garage, and he was learning how to play drums. I was learning how to play guitar. You know, I mean, I already knew chords and everything.
How old were you at this time?
We're talking 15 years old, going on 16. And we became best friends, and I would ride my bicycle. I had a 10-speed Schwinn, and I would ride from Broadway and H all the way down to National City to Plaza and Harbison, where his parents lived, with my little electric guitar strapped to my back.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's crazy. And he had a little amp over there in his garage. And we lock ourselves in the garage and try our best to get better, but, you know, we sounded horrible, but nobody seemed to matter.
When I was 15, I knew nothing about the New York Dolls. I didn't have anyone to expose me to them. Now, being all the way over here in California, right? How did you discover the New York Dolls? I mean, were they that popular, or?
Well, I think what made the Zeros in regards to the musical influences, and I think I'm pretty much on target, was Alejandro Escovedo, Javier's older brother. Because Javier's older brother, before they moved to San Diego, they used to live in Huntington Beach, the Escovedos. And Alejandro was at an age at that time that he could go to Hollywood and see bands at the Whiskey or, Starwood and stuff. And, these were the kind of bands that were playing up there, the Dolls.
Yeah.
And Iggy Pop and Stooges, those kind of bands.
AC/DC too.
Yeah, and I think he was bringing back all this information to Javier, and then Javier was absorbing it to the point where
and it rubbed off on
to the point where it influenced his songwriting, because when I met Baba was already friends with Javier. Robert and Baba are first cousins, Robert Lopez. Mm-hmm. And Robert was learning how to play guitar. And basically what happened was Javier started dating Robert's sister, Rhoda, in Chula, I think. Chula High School.
All the way back then.
Yeah, and then Javier wanted to start a band, so Rhoda Lopez said to Javier, well, my brother's learning how to play guitar, and you guys should do something. And that's how they came together. And then Baba always wanted to do something with Robert, band-wise, right, with his cousin. So then they eventually got Baba to be the drummer. And by then, Baba and I were really, really good friends. And they needed a bass player. And so Baba kept bugging him to have me play, And they're like, oh, I don't know, And it's funny because at one point, like a couple of weeks went by, and I said, well, did they say anything? What's going on? I talked about it on the phone. And he jokingly said, they said there's going to be too many Mexicans in the band.
Oh, really?
And I remember I was like, that's silly. That's funny, though. But, I caught on to it. It wasn't like a discrimination thing, but that's Bob's humor,
funny. Yeah, okay.
That he would say that. And I know he probably made it up on the spot, because that's how he is. But anyways, but yeah, I ended up playing bass because when I met Bob, I was playing guitar, and then I remember we got together with some friends. And one time we got together with two other friends from school who were learning how to play guitar, and there was 3 guitar players and a drummer, right? And everybody wanted to be Jimmy Page at the same time. And I was like, this is crazy. I'm like, there's no bass player. I'll be the bass player. because we need one. And so I decided to get a bass. I had a friend in junior high, Winston Junior High at the time, Darren, and he was a trumpet guy, and he wanted an electric bass, so we went in halfers. I put in $12.50 that my mom gave me, and he put in $12.50 that his mom gave him, and we went to the pawn shop on 3rd Avenue and G Street in Chula Vista and bought a bass out of the pawn shop. And then he would have it one week, I'd have it another week, and that went on for a couple of months, and I was like, I really want to keep this thing all the time. And so he wanted a bicycle, and I had like a cheap Schwinn Stingray copy bicycle thing. So I said, I'll give you my half of the, I'll give you my bicycle for the bass, for the other half that
Do you still have that bass?
No, man. That was a long time ago. That's nice. Yeah.
I know.
Early 70s, late 75 or 76. And then I took the bass. I went to wood shop in Chula Junior High, and it was like shaped like a precision bass. And I had the teacher there, because I wasn't in the class. I said, can you cut this so it looked more symmetrical? So he did that for me. And then I had an uncle who used to work at Stanley Dodge in the Mile of Cars, National City. He was an auto body repair guy. And I took it to him to paint it. And he goes, I'm going to teach you how to paint it. You do all the work. I'll tell you how to do it. And I learned how to paint from him. And it was really great because cool. I used that many years for many projects. So then I had somewhat of a left-handed bass thing, Yeah, that's how I got into bass. And then, when Baba and Javier and Robert were playing, they eventually got a gig in Rosarito. It was a party, somebody related to Javier, like a cousin or something. So we were invited to play for like 20 minutes. And then they didn't have a bass player, so I ended up getting pulled in for that. Yeah. And that's how I ended up in the band, down in Rosarito. Now,
they pulled you in for that. Was it like the day of the show, or were you?
No, it was like a couple of bit, yeah. We definitely rehearsed. Yeah, it was maybe 2 weeks before.
Oh, cool.
We did rehearse, and then suddenly there were the Zeros, because Robert and Javier had tried to get something going on right before Bob and I came in with 2 other kids, and they were calling themselves the Main Street Brats, but that didn't last that long, And so that's why we have that song Main Street Brat.
Which is funny because there was a band, I think, in Australia called the Main Street Brats, of course, because of you. So it kind of went full circle.
Yeah, no, that happens a lot. There's also a band called the Hand Grenade Hearts in Australia, actually, that I know of. But that's how the band came together,
And so you were in high school when this happened?
At that point, we were, yes. We just started going to sophomore.
So were you a big deal in high school? Like going, oh my God.
No, on the contrary. We were freaks.
Really?
Yeah, we were the misfits,
And you all went to the same high school together?
Baba was going to Sweetwater in National City. I was going to Chula Vista High, and Robert was like, I think, a year or 2 ahead of me. Javier had already graduated, I think, at that point, and because he was always a couple years older than us, And no, but I mean, you got to remember that, we're talking late 76, early 77. I mean, the most popular music at the time was Lynyrd Skynyrd and Fleetwood Mac and Kiss and ELO, and nobody had heard of the Ramones. No, there was no,
Have you heard of it? Did you hear about the Ramones? We knew about the New York Dolls, but
so that's how we. Getting back to your question after all this about the New York Dolls, that's how I discovered the New York Dolls was through Baba, because Baba most likely discovered it through Javier or Robert, who discovered it through Javier probably. Yeah. And that's how I found out about the Dolls, and I immediately loved the music. I was like, these guys are awesome, In regards to the punk rock scene, I always will never forget, we were at rehearsal one time, because once we started playing together as a band, we got a rehearsal space off of Sweetwater near the 54 freeway over there. And monthly, we played by the month. It wasn't a lot of money. And we would meet there. And then Robert shows up one day and he goes, I hear there's this thing called punk rock in England. And we're like, what the hell's that?
Really?
I mean, seriously. We're like,
wow,
what the hell's that? And then I goes, well, it's like they wear diapers. I mean, they wear safety pins. It's like a fashion thing. And I'm like, safety pins? All I could picture was like people wearing diapers. That was back then. You wore with safety pins. Maybe some Pampers came in around then, but I thought, I can't picture that. And then shortly after that, one day we met at Robert's house because he lived close to the rehearsal space, and he had the Ramones' first album. He had the Ramones' first album. He goes, hey, I got the Ramones album, and we're looking at it going, oh my God, look at these guys, Then he slaps it on, and then you listen to 53rd and 3rd and Blitzkrieg Bop, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is like a whole other thing.
Did that influence you at all, or you were more New York Dolls influenced?
No, we were definitely more Iggy Pop, Stooges, New York Dolls. We also liked like the Seeds, Count Five, all those sort of lesser known Hollywood, bands that didn't really make it big, but they were cool, And then, but when we heard the Ramones, of course, we were like, okay, this is,
we can do this and this
is where it's
serious,
going, So yeah, we definitely got inspired by that. And then, but we had nowhere to play in San Diego. There was nothing. You had to be a cover band and look like Lynyrd Skynyrd or any of those bands at the time, and so.
Well, I want to get back to the New York Dolls thing for a second. Robert said this at a show, 077 show, actually, a month or two ago. He says, we were always called the Mexican Ramones, but that's not true. We were the Mexican New York Dolls.
No, I totally agree.
I think everyone should agree. I mean, because it's true, and basically from what you just said, who came up with the term? What
Mexican Ramones?
And how did that stick? It's like it seemed to snowball.
Like a barnacle on the side of a boat. That's for damn sure. But basically, Tamara Duplanty, who was a singer for the Screamers. He was being interviewed by Slash magazine in Hollywood by Claude Bessie, aka Kickboy, who was one of the founders of Slash magazine. And he asked him, well, what do you think of the Zeros? I guess that's the first thing that came to his mind. They're like the Mexican Ramones. I mean, we were the farthest thing from sounding like the Ramones.
Yeah.
And it just stuck.
Huh. Yeah, everyone, I heard that for decades. And
and if you sit down and play their record and play our record, you're like, they don't sound like that.
No, yeah.
Or vice versa. I always said, actually, no, the Ramones were the American Zeros, just to get back at people.
Now, you mentioned about playing gigs, and there were no gigs to play. There was no punk rock scene or anything.
No.
But the Zeros did play the first, I think, punk show in San Diego at the Adams Theater.
That was almost a year, 79, wasn't it? Or late 78, somewhere in there. I can't remember the date.
I heard 77.
Well, maybe it was. Yeah, maybe it was 77, yeah.
How did that come about? I mean, did you have a manager or somebody was setting up a...
We didn't have any managers, and...
It was the Dills?
It was the Dills, who were the only other San Diego band, but they were from North County. They were from Carlsbad. And it was us, the Dills, I think the Hitmakers with Ron Silva.
Really?
I think that was it. I think it was just 3 bands.
And that was like the first punk rock show in San Diego?
Yeah, at Adams Street Theater.
And so how did that do? A lot of people there?
Do you
remember it?
Yeah, all my uncles and my aunts and my grandparents were there.
That's cool.
We had a lot of family show up. It was great. But it was so new, everything was so new. Like the whole punk rock thing was so new. San Diego was definitely quite a few years behind catching up, because in 77, that's why we had to go to LA to play. We couldn't do anything here for a band like us. And Javier used to go to the Capitol Records building parking lots record swap meet. They had it once a month. And by then we had already recorded a demo in Bonita, 5-song demo, which is 2 of the songs are on the first single, which is Don't Push Me Around the Wind. And he took this cassette up there, and I believe he ran into Peter Case or Paul Collins, I don't recall, but it was one of the two guys from the Nerves, and they were the ones who put the very first punk rock show in LA, which was at this tiny, tiny little theater called the Orpheum, and you had to access it through an alleyway that was parallel to Sunset Boulevard, right across from Tower Records when it used to be there on Boulevard.
Viper Room?
No, it was
or the other way.
No, it was actually not on the main street. It was in an alleyway in the back. It was great. Yeah, the Viper Room was a block farther down east of Tower Record. Tower Record. Yeah. No, it was this tiny little hole in the wall, and they got the Weirdos. The Germs' first gig, and then they liked our songs, and so they got us on the bill. But then the Nerves dropped out, and they were going to cancel the gig. And it was Cliff Roman, the rhythm guitar player for the Weirdos, who saved the gig. He says, "Well, we're going to make it happen. Still, we'll take it over." And the crazy part was, the Damned were in town.
Oh wow!
They'd been touring around that time with Television, and Television kicked them off their tour in LA, and they got stranded in LA, and they were hanging out at Bump Records because everybody would go to Bump Records, and the Weirdos were on Bump at that moment, and they took in the Damned and let them stay in I don't know which one of the Weirdo guys did, but let them stay in their apartment for a couple days or whatever. And the day of the gig that we played, the Germs opened up. We came on later, second. I think the Zippers were on the bill. They were on Bump. They were more poppy. And then the Weirdos headline. And for their encore, the Captain got on stage with them and played guitar.
Oh, wow.
And that was the first time I ever heard of the Damned, But it was just so crazy, that they were there. And
you just saw them last week.
Well, not only that, but last summer, the Avengers toured with the Damned for 2 weeks straight. I was playing bass on that tour. It was amazing. And that's how I found out why they were in LA. I was last summer on that tour. The Captain got friendly with us, Captain Sensible, and started hanging out in our dressing room because I didn't want to bother them. I was like, I was a fanboy. I was like, I don't like to bother, people like that. They probably don't like it anyway. And I remember I was like, sooner or later they'll come around, once they realize that we're not threatening, we're not bugging them, they'll be comfortable with us. And they did. They got comfortable with us. And that's when I asked the Captain, I said, do you remember that back in 1977 in Hollywood when you got up on stage with the Weirdos? And he's like, oh yeah. Then he told me that whole story, how they got kicked off the Television tour, man. It's crazy. But yeah.
What do you remember about the Germs?
They were terrible.
That was 77, right? That's when they were all boys.
It was the first gig, and they admitted that they didn't know how to play. And Darby was doing the whole Iggy Pop, smearing himself with peanut butter and rolling around on the floor, making a mess. And I remember I was like, well, they're not exactly the Beatles. But, and then they got off stage and we played. And, we were like so shy back then. We were like really shy. And, we're kids from Chula Vista, for crying out loud, in the middle of all this craziness. And we're like, oh my gosh, we were really, really like, our eyes were like this all night. Because everybody's dressed in punk and everything. And that was really like our real first exposure to the fashion, like that close, And I remember I even told Jackie Ramirez, who went with us, who was friends with Javier and Robert and Rhoda, and she was a photographer, and she came with us, and and I said, my God, it looks like it's Halloween, like right in the springtime here. And she goes, well, that's the fashion, And I said, oh, I finally get to see it, because you didn't have access to those kind of images on the, we didn't have.
Yeah.
Circus Magazine wasn't posting anything about punk or Rolling Stone or any of those magazines were doing any of that, We just heard it. A couple times here and there it existed, and suddenly we're right in the middle of it, and we're like, oh wow, this is really cool.
So yeah, I heard two stories. One, you played all over San Diego all the time, and another where you never played San Diego and basically was mostly playing up in LA.
Yeah,
so I guess it was mostly LA.
Yeah, we never played San Diego. There really was nothing, no venues for that kind of music or even for an original band. Even if it wasn't a band like us, it would have been an original band that was playing whatever melodic, Beatle-influenced music or whatever. That there really wasn't anything available unless you were like a big name and you were playing sports arena, or I don't know if Humphreys was still in existence back then, if it existed back then, but and you're touring through town. But the one thing I always came to realize was that San Diego suffered a lot because of its proximity to LA. Everybody goes to LA to play. Everybody moves to, at that point, everybody was moving to Hollywood to make it. Jake Lee, who was the guitar player for Black Sabbath, right, for Ozzy, he was from Imperial Beach, but he had to move over there to make it. Yeah, and that happened with a lot of bands, a lot of musicians, if they took themselves seriously, they'd get out of town, So, yeah.
So, did you ever play with the Germs again after they got better, or that was
I think we did a few more gigs, here and there, and I was really, we played with a lot of bands. I mean, we did it was a 3-day punk thing at the Whiskey that Kim Fowley put together. And there was like the Deadbeats, the Germs, anybody that was in a punk band, any punk band that was going on, Alley Cats, I think. And that was kind of a big deal. Because that happened right after that Orpheum thing. That became like it was almost like indoctrination of sort for LA. Like, here we are, take it or leave it,
What was I going to say? Did you ever play with the Runaways?
No, but I did see them at the Whiskey,
day.
When we were there.
Nice.
Saw them there. Yeah, that was really cool. Yeah, I saw AC/DC at the Whiskey.
Oh, that was going to be my next question. How was that?
That was a crazy night because we were in LA. I think we were playing the next night at the Whiskey, and I think it was a Saturday we were playing. We got there on a Friday, and then we were like, let's go hang out at the Whiskey, and we're hanging out, whatever. And then suddenly this band comes on, and they're just rocking out. I didn't know who they were. I had no clue, nothing. We just went there to hang out. I didn't even look at the marquee, probably. and then I'm watching them, and I see Angus, little schoolboy outfit, and then there's Bon Scott with no shirt on, and then Angus gets on the shoulders. I'm watching, going, wow, those guys are pretty wild. And then I just kind of forgot about it. And I honestly thought I was probably some band from Orange County or something. I really thought that. And then about a month later, I was in, was it Licorice or Peaches record store? There was a record store practically right across from the Whiskey. And we were back in town, and we're killing time at the record store. And I'm sorting through the A section, and boom, there's that guy with the school uniform on the cover. I think it was Powerage.
Wow.
Right? And I'm going, holy shit, that was AC/DC who I saw. But it was so new. Everything was so new. And then later on, years later, I came to appreciate that because I became a big fan of theirs, especially the whole Bon Scott era. Even though they're still good after that. They're great. I agree. Hell's Bells and all that stuff. Yeah. I love that band.
What do you remember about seeing the Runaways? Anything or?
They were tight and they were great. They were really good,
They were about the same age as you.
Yeah. They were a little, maybe a few years older, but and they looked great on stage, and there's a lot of people there, and all the girls looked really cool with their instruments, especially Joan Jett, obviously. Yeah. She got really into the whole punk scene, and that was cool that she was more open-minded about that, because a lot of those bands were not really accepting.
It was like one or the other, right?
Yeah. Because I think the punk scene became a threat. Yeah. Because it was new and people were really getting into it, But I got a really funny story about David Lee Roth, because another time too, we were there at the Whiskey, maybe to do sound check or something, and Baba and I are hanging out at the entrance, at the doorway out there, on a sidewalk, And the Whiskey, as you know, it's on a corner block street there on the block, and then you can look down towards the east to the corner, and you can see there's a gas station and the record store across the street and what have you, going down towards Tower Records farther down. And Bob and I are standing around, and then this guy walks around the corner like that and stands right down the corner, and I'm like, said to Baba, oh man, look at that guy. He's some kind of fag. And he was wearing like the silvery lame pants with the tassels and, like a weird matching vest, and his hair is all blonde and flowy. And then the guy heard us, right? And he started walking to us. Like, what do you say? And Bob and I just ran into the club and disappeared into the club. And then we're like, Jesus, man, And the same thing happened. Later on, I'm looking at a record store, and who do I see on the Van Halen record cover? It was that guy in the corner.
Wow.
Oh, my God. Those are so goofy. From what I recall, they weren't too crazy about the punk scene, but whatever.
Yeah.